Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the writer of There's Something Wrong with Patrick Todd, the upcoming Batman Incorporated, and most crucially to this conversation, Predator over at Marvel. It's Ed Brisson. Thanks for coming on, Ed.
Hey, thanks for having me.
How's the day been going for you? You doing any scripting, or is it just all woodwork over there?
I'm doing some woodworking and some scripting. I find that doing something that's not me sitting in front of the computer, as counterintuitive as it might sound, helps me with writing. Like, I need to walk away from the computer and think about things and do something that makes me focus on something that's not the script. And then usually the problems I'm having will be solved by some voice that creeps into the back of my mind with the solutions. So that's where I've been at.
I think it's like when you're doing, say, woodworking, or if you're gardening or whatever you're doing, you kind of are, you're not thinking about it actively, but it's like you have background processing. It's like your computer that's doing something on the side and you're not paying attention to it because you're doing something else. It'll be doing that too, but you're just, that shifting into the background processing, it like almost helps you unlock things sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like for the woodworking, for the part that I'm at right now, it's just mechanical. So it's not even, there's no thought into what I'm doing. I'm just putting the pieces where they need to go, sort of thing. And yeah, it helped me solve the problem I was having today with the script. So
is that like the inking stage of woodworking?
Yeah, kind of, but that I don't want to sound sort of dismissive of inkers.
No, that's true. I talk to a lot of artists who say that they can achieve like an almost like Zen-like state when they're inking because they get really like focused on the lines and they're not really thinking about stuff. They're just kind of doing. And
yeah,
it kind of reminded me of what you're talking about with like the what you're doing with woodworking. But before we get into the Predator of it all, because that's going to be the focus of the conversation, I did want to ask you about your recent road trip you did. You took a month-long trip that was 10,000 miles long and across 23 states and 7 provinces with signings at 9 stores and 2 conventions, time for the rollout of There's Something Wrong with Patrick Todd and Predator. That is a lot of driving. How did that go? And what inspired that truly audacious level of road tripping?
So what happened was back in 2020, me and my wife and kid were supposed to take a 2-week road trip.
Sure.
We had a vehicle that we knew we were going to sell and we were going to get a different vehicle. And our plan was to sell the vehicle here and then fly across the country and buy a new car and then drive back with it and spend 2 weeks doing it. But then COVID hit in 2020. So we punted the trip back a year. And for some reason, we decided we'd add a week on, like as a consolation for kicking it back a year. And then obviously in 2021, things were still pretty shitty. So we punted another year, added another week. And so it became this month-long trip. And during that time, we sold the car. So that wasn't a concern. I had a new car and stuff. And I really like road trips. When I moved cross country in 2018, me and my daughter drove across Canada over the course of 7 or 8 days. And much to my surprise, my daughter really liked doing a road trip. Like, there's some long days in that, like 10, 12-hour days of driving periodically. Mm-hmm. And so she was really into it. She was really excited to do a road trip. And so we just wanted to sort of try and make it as epic as possible, as big as possible, as cool as possible. So we just picked some places we wanted to hit and sort of built the trip around that. We had like 32 days to do it. And the first 2 weeks, it was just my daughter and myself. And then we picked my wife up in Vancouver and drove back for the last 10 days, I guess, 11 days. And yeah, that was it. Basically, I like road trips. Turns out my daughter also likes road trips. I've done, like, my entire life. My parents split up when I was pretty young and were on opposite coasts. And my dad would drive out and pick us up and drive us across country because it was cheaper than flying us. So I've been doing these cross-country trips probably since I was about 14.
Okay.
I've done it a few times on my own, and now, it's the first time with family. But yeah, it was great. It was a lot of fun. It would have been funner if we hadn't caught COVID halfway through, but we knew that was
on the table.
We knew that was definitely a possibility. And as soon as we got to Las Vegas, where we spent a couple days, as soon as we got out of the car, we knew that if we were going to catch it anywhere, it was going to be there. And I think that's where my daughter caught it. And then I think I caught it. I tested positive a few days after her, but yeah, it was a good trip though. A lot of fun.
Did you end up skipping San Diego because of that?
No. So we were in Vegas, and then we went from Vegas to San Diego, and then from San Diego to LA. So my daughter tested positive when we were in LA. So the day after San Diego.
Okay.
So we were at San Diego Sunday morning. So she tested positive next morning. But usually it takes a couple of days to test positive. And we had like up here in Halifax anyway, the library just hands out rapid test kits. And there's like boxes of 5. Mm-hmm. So we had like packed something like 60 rapid test kits. We were testing every single day just to be sure. So we think like it takes 48 hours usually from the time you contract it till the time you test positive. And so we figured that it was Las Vegas where we got it. So we basically hopped in the car and drove up to Vancouver as quickly as we could because I knew it was a matter of time before I got it. And I just wanted to isolate in Canada if we could, and literally tested positive the day we crossed the border.
That's crazy.
After crossing the border.
I have to say, first signing you did was in Jetpack Comics in Rochester, New Hampshire. You go there, and then only a week or two later, you're in San Diego for Comic-Con, which is that's a quick jaunt. That's a quick drive.
Yeah, we did the middle of America. We kind of drove through kind of as quickly as we could. I kept getting stymied though by my GPS because we were going to Grand Canyon, and I just put Grand Canyon as we're driving across the middle of America. And anytime there's certain cities I wanted to hit along the way, and anytime I'd pull into a gas station, it would reroute me.
Oh my God.
And so it put me on these weird ass country roads. Like there was one day where we drove for 8 hours through Kansas and came down through Amarillo, Texas. And we just didn't see people for 8 hours. It was just like the weirdest abandoned towns along this country road. But whatever, it was fun.
How did it go from a comic standpoint? It seems pretty cool because you had some I think retail exclusive variants that were rolled out while you were doing it. So you would drop by shops and they would have ones for you to sign and stuff. Was that the case?
Yeah. So there was Heroes Your Mother throughout Comic Shop, which is in a small town in New York called Elmira. They had an exclusive for There's Something Wrong with Patrick Todd. That was our first proper signing. Like the Jetpack signing was the thing I just stopped in and signed stock and stuff.
Right.
The Elmira one was great. Like everyone wore a mask, which was just crazy, which is great. We were trying to keep it safe as possible, so we were wearing masks at every signing. There was I did a 2-hour signing there, and I could have gone probably for 3. It was just constantly busy. And yeah, they had a variant. So they had the variant artist for that cover. His name was Chris Bell, who would also come out to the signing, which was great. And then on the way back at Montreal, there was a store called Farside who had a variant cover for Predator #1. But they did a virtual signing, which was kind of a weird deal. But
yeah.
It worked out. I sold a ton, signed a ton of books. It seemed they did really well. So, I'm not complaining.
Yeah, no kidding. It sounds like it worked out well. All right, enough preamble. What we're here for, like I said, is our first ever Pred Talk in Off Panels history. We're here to talk about Ed's work on the current Predator series with artist Kev Walker, but, also the larger Predator franchise of stories. Before we do that, I'm going to do the solicit, Ed, so you don't have to walk through what it's actually about. It's the solicit for the first issue of the series, but I think it covers the base as well. In the near future, a young girl sees her family slaughtered by the deadliest and most feared hunter in the universe, a predator. Years later, though her ship is barely holding together and food is running short, Theta won't stop stalking the spaceways until the Yautja monster who killed her family is dead, or she is. I've read the first 2 issues of the series, and I am a very big Predator franchise fan, much to my own detriment at times. And I will be honest, Ed, it's just great. It's a great Predator story. But as soon as I read the announcement for the series, I knew I wanted to have you on because you walk through this story about wearing out VHS tapes and just your love of the franchise and everything like that. And that I have a lasting love of the original movie as well. And also hope springs eternal when it comes to the Predator franchise for me. But let's start there, Ed. I know you've recounted already, but what is your Predator origin story and why do you think the franchise is something that you're consistently interested in.
So when I first saw Predator at the drive-in theater when I lived in Oshawa as a kid, so when it first came out, and it blew me away. And where I lived in Oshawa, I could actually see from my bedroom window the drive-in screen. It was about 1 kilometer away. It was very small, like you could barely see it. But I had binoculars, and I would watch a movie. And still the picture was not huge. Even with the binoculars, I couldn't hear anything. But I was just kind of really obsessive about it. I was a big horror film fan growing up, and still I'm a big fan of horror. And also like a big action. This was the era of like Schwarzenegger, and I was a huge Terminator fan, a fan of all of his films. So this was like just the perfect marriage of the two things I was in love with back then. And yeah, I had it on VHS. I watched the hell out of it when Predator 2 came out. I saw it in the theater, then had the VHS as well. And I've seen all the Predator films at the theater. Usually on really opening weekends. I don't know. It's just there's something about that sort of a boogeyman type story. Like the Predator is like the ultimate boogeyman, and just telling stories about finding a way to sort of outsmart this creature that is the apex hunter in the universe, who's been studying us, who's been fighting against us again and again and again to learn how people fight and learn how to defeat us and all this sort of stuff. I don't know. It's just great. It's a lot of fun.
It is funny because I think there's a lot of nuanced thoughts that you can put into why the Predator franchise at its apex is really awesome. But then there's other times where you're just like, it's just really cool. And it's really fun to watch like Arnold or like a roided out Adrian Brody fight against Predators. And there's just something about it that works. I have to say, a thing I appreciate about Predators is that, when I was growing up, okay, so like, let's talk about the 80s in movie villains. Like, I was horrified of like Freddy Krueger because I always found the idea of Freddy Krueger to be inescapable, because it's like, I can't not sleep. If dreams are his domain, then I am like hosed. Or like, like Michael Myers or Jason, they just never stop coming. But Predators, I felt like I kind of had a safety from, in theory, because they're scary, but I also am extremely not the type of person that Predator would ever hunt, because I'm not an apex predator. I'm not somebody that they'd be like, we want to learn from this guy. They're like, this guy just sits around and plays video games. There is no, like, what are we going to do? The hunting him would not be sport. I actually really appreciate him for that reason, because it was like I had some distance to it, but they did blend that horror and action really well in a way that many didn't. And I think that genre blend was always really, I don't know, there was something about it. I love how like the movies kind of toy with that. It's like I just rewatched Predator 2 for the first time since I was a kid. That movie was way more freaky than I remembered. There's some like pretty horrific elements in that. Also, I just want to say, you quoted Predator 2's King Willie in an interview with CBR, which is truly impressive. That's a level of fandom that I did not expect from any human.
I don't even remember doing that, but yeah, that sounds like me. Predator 2, I was a big defender of for a very long time. I think it's gory as hell. I think the one, which is weird because I normally love like a really good violent film, I guess. And that film is got it in spades. And if I remember correctly, they had to cut a bunch just to get a theatrical release. But I think that's also one of the sort of drawbacks to it, is that it doesn't. I think the Predator works best when they remain in the shadows and remain sort of just out of sight, for the majority of the story. Like if in the original Predator film, I think that film was an hour and 47 minutes. And the Predator's only on screen for about 7 minutes. Yeah. They're rarely on screen. And as we, go forward with Predator films, we tend to get more and more Predator. And I think that works against the story. And it's interesting because one of the things I've had a couple people poke me about online is that there's not enough Predator in the book that I'm doing. There's Predators definitely in the book. But like, again, I feel like it's almost impossible to tell a story. I for me anyway, to tell the story from the predator perspective, I don't think it works the same way. It's a weird way to go. And I think you really need to like sort of hold back as much and use the predator sparingly, but smart. Like if I think that's why prey works so well. Like we don't see that predator a lot. We know that it's there always, but we don't actually see it a whole ton. I don't know what the screen time for the predator is in that movie. And I think that's one thing that's so effective about the films, and that's, I think, a knock against Predator 2 is that we see the predator that he's fighting, and then the predator that the predators that show up at the end. There's almost too much predator.
Yeah,
you know what I mean.
I was actually talking to my wife last night because I made the foolish decision of rewatching The Predator right before this, the fourth one of the 5 solo movies, and she was like, "Oh, this movie's bad," and I was like, "Well, yeah, it's not great." I mean, like, one of the main mistakes I told her, I was just like, they show the predator way too much. It's just they're like running around. They're at a school, and there's 2 predators that are not even like brought on their cloaking or whatever, and they're just hanging out, and they got dogs running around, and there are a lot of flaws to it. But another flaw I think that had is it tried too hard to explain things rather than just being a cool hunter versus prey story, and I think that that's one of the tricky things. Like, and I think the Alien franchise, I also love the Alien franchise, and unfortunately for both of them, they are completely linked forever in a lot of people's minds. But the Yautja thing is interesting because I'd actually never heard of that until I was preparing for this, despite the fact I consider myself a pretty big Predator fan. And that feels like a step towards like explaining stuff like this. Do you feel like that the more you explain about the Predators, that the less interesting they are in some ways?
So that it's a fine line I've been trying to sort of ride in the book I'm doing, because part of how Theta is able to hunt them is she's learning about them.
Right.
And something I'm trying to do sparingly is really share with the reader exactly how much she knows, and how, like, we know that she knows their hunting routes, but that's, I think, something we've already sort of established in films, is that they have sort of hunting patterns that they move around. And like, I do think like there is this, one of her driving goals in the book is that she basically, eventually she's just going to want to wipe out all the predators, right? So that would involve finding out where they come from. But that's not somewhere I want to go, because I think that as soon as we go to like a predator home planet, and which is separate from the game preserve planet and predators. I think that's a wholly interesting thing, and that doesn't feel like where the predators live. That just feels like some sort of ecosystem that they've taken over so they can.
That's like their murder safari planet.
Yeah, exactly. It's not where they live, and I do definitely think that we need to keep a lot of mystery about them. When you think about comics and stuff, I think. I don't know if I'm going to take some shit for this, but I think Wolverine was more interesting before we knew his origin. Like, I think when you have that mystery, it's more engaging. You can run into the argument that like it just becomes like a nonstop tease. That's you're not revealing this information where like logically it should come out. But I do think as long as possible, you don't want to give too much information about how the predators' society works, where they actually come from, or I don't know, their mating habits or whatever. I don't know. Like as little as known about them, the better. You
used the term boogeyman earlier, and I think that that's an interesting phrasing for that, because boogeymans are inherently more effective the less you know about them, because they're an unknown. It's like when it's just like when it's like a scary, like when you think you have, like with James Tynion and Gavin Fullerton's The Closet, that story works because, well, partially because it's an understanding of like the psychology of this kid in the story, but also because it's a scary thing in the closet, and like you don't know what that thing is, and so that becomes scary. Monsters Inc. is the exact opposite level of that, because they explain what's in the closet. Also, it's a kids movie that's a comedy, so
sure.
Very unrelated. But like the less you know about these things, a lot of times you can start making up like the stories in your head as to why this is happening. Like, you know, one of the things I think works really well about Predators, the third movie, the one where they get dropped on the murder safari planet, and Adrian Brody got extremely ripped, and there's a shocking amount of amazing actors in that movie, is that the entire movie, they're trying to basically figure out what the hell's going on. Not only do they not know where they are, they're also trying to figure out what's hunting them. They're also trying to figure out what's going on. And they're all these like really adept mercenary type people who know this world and they know how to do this stuff. And they're starting to piece things together. And I think that makes it really interesting because it's all about like unlocking the unknown, but strictly from your terms. When you start like getting into the head of the Predator, like you said, that's when you start kind of unlocking on the Predator's terms, and I think that's a little bit less interesting. But I think the hunting grounds thing, their routes and everything, that makes sense because I feel like that fits within the accepted knowledge we have of the characters. It's like something that we already know, so it makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, you know, if you take Predator 1 and Predator 2, the idea is that it seems like the Predators are coming to Earth on 10-year cycles, right?
Right.
And that's why, you know, it seems inexplicable at first when you see Predators 2 that it came out in 1990 and it's set 7 years in the future. But that is to get that sort of like that 10-year gap. And I don't remember when Prey is set.
2010. That's in the 1700s, isn't it? Like,
yeah, but I wonder what year specific. Is it 1719, I think? So that
it was 1715 was when the musket came from, so it was right around then. I'm pretty sure it was 1719 actually. But anyway, sorry, continue.
Yeah, and so, you know, I was sort of taking that thing from Predator 1, Predator 2 to be like, okay, you know, they're coming here on cycles, so that means like if they're only coming to Earth once every 10 years, like where else are they going? And I think it's just, you know, because obviously mankind is not necessarily the apex predator, the one to sort of test your mettle against. You know, there's got to be others out there, you know, beyond just you know, the xenomorphs or whatever. And so yeah, that's why I thought it would be interesting that she could find their hunting routes. She could then sort of track them. But like beyond that, I don't want to get too deeply into who, you know, what the predators are and where they come from. As I mentioned before, I think I want to give her just enough that she can continue this sort of thing and have these hunting routes. And then having the hunting routes also just opens us up to opportunities to tell stories on other planets with maybe other alien creatures who the predators may deem worthy of hunting. And that creates all sorts of other complications, I think, for Theta as she's going forward.
I do think it's interesting that, you know, you said that like maybe we're not the apex predators. They do continuously lose to humans, so I could see why they would think that we are. There's got to be tougher aliens out there,
right.
but if they keep losing, they're just like, man, that Danny Glover, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Adrian Brody, God, who else have they lost to? Somehow, like Boyd Holbrook. Like they're like, we're gonna keep going back to that place because we keep taking these L's.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, it's hard. Maybe, but like, you know. There's got to be, you know, it would be great to tell the story where they came here and just won and went away. And there's got to be those sort of stories, right? And we just haven't seen them. But yeah, I would like to see other planets where predators are successful and maybe not successful.
Yeah,
who knows? Maybe we're just like the semifinal round and someone beyond. You know.
Ooh, now you're introducing the idea of a tournament, and somebody's going to start writing fan fiction about this. And now, a quick word from our sponsor. It's Bad Idea, and they are back. And this time, I really mean it. It's Bad Idea 2 Part 1, which sounds crazy, but hear me out. This first wave of 7 titles with 15 releases includes fantastic creators like Ramon Villalobos, Tamara Bonvillain, Joshua Dysart, Alberto Ponticelli, and more on superbly titled comics like Escape from Wyoming, a future winner for the best named comic Eisner. Want to read those titles and more? Presumably, at some point, visit Bad Idea's site and find the Bad Idea store nearest you and make the magic happen. And now, back to the show. I want to talk about the origins of the project itself because I find things like this to be really interesting because it's weird. There's like in my mind, it's a Marvel comic, and Marvel superheroes fit within these parameters. And as soon as you introduce like a licensed element or an element that's outside of their bounds, it seems like it would complicate it more. But then I also think about the fact that a Predator, like the Predator story, is no different than like Wolverine's story, where it's like when you go into that project, you have all this accepted knowledge and all this stuff that you have to kind of factor in. So it's not really that different. But going back to the origins, like how did this project first start coming together? Like, did you have to pitch it? Were you approached? How did it work?
Yeah, I was approached. It was a weird thing where I had gotten a message from them that they were getting the Alien and Predator license, and would I be interested, in writing one of the two. And it wasn't like saying, choose one of the two, but like it is, would you have interest in working on any of these properties, sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And I definitely did. And, I had messaged that giant, like I love aliens, but like, if there was an opportunity to write Predators, I would love that. And then Jake Thomas contacted me maybe a month later, I can't remember. This was back like mid-COVID. This is August 2020. Mm-hmm. So he contacted me to say that they were going to do the Predator book, and I think I wrote. It's the fastest I've ever written a pitch. I think I wrote it within a day or two and sent it off to him because I already had the idea. Oddly, from like writing what wasn't termed fan fiction back then when I was in elementary school and first couple of years of junior high, I used to write a lot of fan fiction about, basically a lot of it was like me and my friends having to fight like a super team of like Michael Myers, Freddy Krueger, Jason, Leatherface, Joe,
the dream team,
right? Yeah, and all my friends would get murdered, and I'd be the last guy, the last one standing, of course. But then later on, I wrote some Predator stuff, and it was always like I just wrote it for myself. I rarely ever shared it with anyone. I would just write these stories in notebooks instead of paying attention in French class. And I had like this idea years ago of like someone just out there sort of hunting predators down. It was more like when I was younger, it was more in this idea of like, say, the Punisher in space, like hunting down predators. Then when they approached me for it, I sort of just remembered this stuff I played around with when I was younger and just sort of went back. Like I don't physically have any of that anymore, but I went back to that sort of idea and started playing around with it again and, changed a bunch of stuff around and, just pitched what was largely something I'd probably come up with when I was like 13 or 14, when I was a giant fan of this franchise. Obviously smarter maybe than it was back then. But yeah, and it got approved. It went through pretty seamless from Marvel. Then 20th Century Fox was happy with it. Minimal notes, throughout the whole process. It's been actually pretty great.
Were you given? This is like getting into like David Harper fan fiction territory. David Harper fan fiction for how these things work territory. Were you given like a Predator rule book or something, like a guide to the do's and don'ts of the Predators? Does such a thing exist?
As far as I know, a thing does not exist.
Dang.
It's mostly like, them sort of, knocking the ball out of the basket, on things you might want to do. You find out like when you try and write it or try and put it in an outline, like, hey, we can't do this. There was something I had with sort of a rudimentary sort of Yuja translation device, which we do see in the Predator, which they'd sort of like, they were cautious about. In the end, I actually took it out because I realized that, again, felt like maybe going a little bit too far in like understanding what the Predators are trying to say and what they want. I think that's, again, not being able to communicate, I think, is a strength in these stories. Keeps them more of a mystery.
Absolutely.
And so that was an idea I had somewhere along the line. They didn't shoot it down, but they just cautioned around it, and ultimately I just took it out. I can't remember too many of the other things that got shot down. I think using the term Yucha, they were fairly certain that she wouldn't know, that nobody would know that term, not having had much contact with their culture.
Yeah.
So it was another thing I removed. That's all I can remember. But there have been, a few notes here and there, but unfortunately no sort of playbook or guideline book, which is like kind of par for course for most like, work for hire big two stuff, is you kind of only find out what you can't do when
you start pushing on those barriers. Yeah, that makes sense. I like to think that 20th Century Fox is just basically like Sterling K. Brown's character in The Predator, where they're like, there's that one of the only parts I really like in that movie. It was like they're having the discussion about how it's the Predator is actually more of like a hunter or like a sports fisherman or something like that. And he's like, yeah, but we took a vote and Predator's cooler. And they're like, agreed. And everyone's like, yeah. And he's like, fuck yeah. And like, there's something about where it's like, even something like unlocking the name Yucha. Is that how you pronounce it?
So I don't know. It's one of those words where I've only read it a million times. And I can't, I've not revisited the Alien versus Predator films.
Oh, is that what it's from?
I don't know if it's from that, but I'm just saying that if it is in those, then I can't recall how they said it. But it's one of those words that I've read, not heard, as far as I
looked up pronunciation. YA dash big O T dash JA. So Yaucha, I think it is. But anyways, it's funny. I'm 38 years old. I've watched those movies a million times, and at no point in my I've watched all the movies besides the AVP movies multiple times, and my brain did not have that term in my head. I was 100% just Sterling K. Brown. I just was like Predator. Yes, that's it. But
yeah.
Anyways, well, okay. I did want to talk about the setting, because I think the setting is really fascinating, especially when you're talking about those 10-year cycles. There are a lot of timelines and locations that these stories take place in. Like you mentioned, 87 is the original story. 97 is the next one. Predators is 2010, I believe. And then
it's never stated, I think. It
was released in 2010.
Yeah, it was released in 2010, but it's never stated in it what year it takes place, which I only mentioned because I've been going over this the last couple of days because I rewatched Predators 2 days ago, and there's one thread in there that I've sort of been picking at. Theoretically, if you look, theoretically, if you pick what conflicts they've all been plucked from, it probably takes place around 2010, but I was really questioning the whole idea of like how they got there and how long each one is out for, right?
right?
Are they out? Do they wake up the next day? Like what have? Anyway, that's.
Doesn't the intro of your issues? It has like a timeline in the.
Yes. So
I think it does say 2010. Whatever.
Does it say that?
I think so. I want to say 2010.
I just got my comps today. So
yeah, let's check it out. But anyway, so there's that, and then the Predator takes place in, I don't know, I thought it was like 2018, but it could be any time. But anyways, the ultimate point though is your story takes place in 2056 after humanity has gotten big up on that space travel beat.
Yes.
Was part of the thinking behind that just wanting to get some separation from those pre-existing stories, both in terms of time and space?
No, actually, it was just really like I wanted someone hunting predators, and so that meant that we had to have they got to be traveling through space. So we needed some sort of future date where this could be possible. I think originally I was pushing for further in the future, like 100 years out. And I remember having a bit of back and forth with my editor at the time, and they wanted to bring it in a little bit closer to our own timeline. And I don't recall why that was. I think their concern was that like they didn't want like we didn't want to do it like Star Wars, where like there's a million planets that are sort of
you want developed but not too developed.
Yeah. We didn't want to be able to like, Theta. We didn't want Theta to show up at like, Mos Eisley or something like that, where like aliens are traveling the galaxy or all meeting. We wanted it just to be like really sort of early days for space travel. Like we could get quite distant, but it's not like we have a bunch of spaceports or anything like that. There are some outposts that we'll get to in this series, but they're more like ports for organizations that are sort of doing some research and stuff out in space. But there's nothing crazy. There's no bars in space. There's no, floating satellite brothels or anything like that. It's still early days. So that's why it was in the future.
She does run into aliens, but she just has to deal with the intergalactic language of fighting them. So
Yes.
there is that. But I think it's at its core, the thing I really like about your story is it inverts the typical structure of these series. Because ultimately, in some capacities, you could say that ultimately all these stories involve the main characters having to kind of hunt the predator. But it's not really that. It's always a defensive hunt. It's like a survival hunt. In this case, Theta, this character that was 12 when her family was killed, jumps 15 years into the future in the story, is now hunting the predators out of revenge. Like, it's what she wants. And successfully, I may add, which is the very unique wrinkle to it, because normally most people run into predators. It's the last thing that they do. Why was that? I mean, short of time traveling back to your childhood brain, why was that an appealing direction to you for this story?
I think that most predator stories we have are they're reactive stories, right?
Yep.
The thing comes, we're reacting to it, and I wanted just a more proactive protagonist, who is going to be out there making these things happen and forcing these sort of things, and even if you think of Dutch or Schwarzenegger in the first movie, he barely survives, right? There's not many characters who are going to want to repeatedly throw themselves into this sort of situation. I think there's some stuff with Theta, this happened when she's 12. She's obviously traumatized. She's I'm sure has some PTSD that, she could probably deal with some therapy. But she's raised by a spaceship. Essentially, right? So she has no real sort of interaction, and she's just sort of driven by this. And I think it just made for a more interesting story. Obviously, I have that she's killed 20 of these things. If you look closely in the first two issues, you can see she's missing a leg, right? She has a prosthetic leg. She's riddled with scars. She's not come out of these unscathed. She's definitely paid the price. And it just felt like a more interesting story, that it's just much more proactive. We can really sort of push these battles a little bit more. I don't know, just felt right.
It's also interesting too, because it doesn't reveal anything. It's not revealing big ideas about the predators and their existence. But one thing I find interesting about it is kind of putting a character in the shoes of the predator, in a sense, in that
Sure.
she is now the one who's hunting and taking stuff from them to improve her own ability to hunt. She is becoming a predator in her own right. But I also think that one element that I really love about it is that you do introduce restricting elements into the story, because Theta's a badass, but she's also a 27-year-old whose development in some ways stopped when she was 12. She stopped that, and then basically has this monomaniacal desire to get revenge, and to the point where she basically forgets to get food for herself and forgets to take care of her own ship. And those elements, her own ship, Sandy, I should note, the Sandpiper, her best friend / mode of conveyance. And that is a really interesting wrinkle to it, because I think a lot of these stories, when you read them, you don't really think of kind of practical elements like that, where it's does this character need to eat, or does this character need to have a functional ship? They just work because they do. Was that restriction necessary because you kind of wanted to say something about Theta herself, in the sense that she's just got blinders on?
It's a bit of that, and also just a bit of wanting to get into how hard it really is to sort of survive out in space when you don't have a lot of resources at your disposal. She doesn't have, she can't just go to a mechanic and repair the ship. So she's got to do all these repairs herself. She's not necessarily trained for it. The AI's got to walk her through it. There's not a lot of resources for food out there either, right? And not just getting food, but sort of being able to store food. In this, I think it's in the second issue where she kills that the large alien creature, where she
the space boar.
Yeah, and eats meat from that. But like, you know, that's great for that time period. But like, how do you kind of store that for the long term? And I think also like, you know, the ship. One of the things, I don't know if it was ever said aloud, but the ship was built to contain, I can't remember the original crew count, but it was like 30 something people for a period of 5 years. So she had a long period of time where there was food available. Mm-hmm. And I wanted this to be at a point where it was starting to run out, and she was really going to have to start worrying about like her caloric intake and you know, and just where to find parts to repair this ship that was really meant to just stay in one place for a long time and then travel back to Earth. It wasn't meant to be bombing around the galaxy like she has been doing. So yeah, these restrictions are just other complications that she's going to have to deal with. These are other things that are going to sort of hinder her success or hinder her progress going forward. So I just want to make life hard for her, I guess, is the thing, you know.
I haven't checked my fitness app for like how many calories you burn per hour for hunting predators, but I imagine it's fairly high. I imagine her caloric needs are high.
Probably, you know, like to stay in shape and all that sort of stuff, you know. I think you need like 2,000 calories a day.
Yeah, she's going to have to be up on like the 6,000 range. She's going to have to eat like Arnold's diet.
Maybe if she's hunting every day, but she's not hunting, right? There's long periods of boredom in between doing this. And so, you know, she could get away with a bit less, I think, during that time. But, you know, these are just other problems I wanted to give her to solve, you know, to show that, you know, that she can survive in this sort of harsh reality that she's put herself into. Because she had the option to go back to Earth, and she's the one who sort of reprogrammed Sandy or overrid Sandy to keep her out of space. And that's still always an option, that she could go back to Earth, but it's not, you know, it's not a thing that she's going to do. And there would be those extra complications coming up in future issues surrounding these problems and these considerations.
And now, a quick word from one of off-panel sponsors. Macroverse is a next-generation digital comics platform, and one with an astonishing number of comics, with currently over 50 series from over 100 creators on their app, with a 5-star rating both on Apple and Google's app stores. Download the app and binge all their titles, including the Eisner-nominated Remind from Jason Brubaker, Lisa K. Weber's Hex 11, which has been described as Harry Potter meets Blade Runner, or the new queer supernatural adventure series Husk that launches on November 1st. It's just $4.99 a month to subscribe to Macroverse, with proceeds directly supporting the creators on the platform. Keep an eye on the future of Macroverse 2, as 2022 is going to bring an epic upgrade that offers a new level of digital collectability and more, with early adopters able to sign up for more information at macroverse.com. And now, back to the show. I do love the fact that she has all these options for like getting food or parts or whatever, but that she can't because she stole her ship. It was programmed to go back to Earth, and she's like, nah, we're going predator hunting. And so she decided to bounce on that. I have to admit, there was a big part of me that when it was like a Star, is it a Star Industries?
Yes.
There was a part of me that was just like, couldn't it have been Weyland Yutani? And my brain is apparently been broken by the AVP franchise. This is terrible.
Sure. Yeah, well, there's that was a consideration going in. Like, it's not. Yeah, I don't want to go too. I don't want to go too far down that path. But yeah, it's, you know, there's reasons.
I'm sure that there are. But okay, I did want to talk about Theta as the lead in a specific sense, because one of the things I think is also really interesting about Predator as an idea, and I think that people really glommed on this when Prey came out, is it is an incredibly flexible idea. All you need is one predator and one group or entity that it's hunting, and that's a story. Wherever it is in time, wherever it is in space, wherever. And it works. So there are a lot of different directions you could have taken this hunter story, because frankly, like, it didn't have to be Theta. It could have been like a Dutch type. It could have been a Adrian Brody type. Hell, it could have been a Topher Grace type. It could have been whatever. It probably wouldn't have been a Topher Grace type. But why was Theta the one that fit this story to you?
So at the time that I was developing this pitch, I did not know about Prey. I didn't find out about Prey until a little bit into developing, which it was called Skull, or Skulls back then. I can't recall. But I do remember when I sent out the pitch and it came back, they're like, "Oh, this is really cool because we're developing a Predator story that takes place a couple hundred years in the past. So this is kind of fun, that you're doing the future." I think, but to Wyatt's Theta, it just felt like there had been this weird sort of thing with predators and women, right, where they tend to not kill women. In Predator 1, it wouldn't kill a woman, and then in Predator 2, there was blanking out the pregnant woman. He knew that she was pregnant, and even like in Predators, I'm blanking on the actress's name, doesn't really have any close encounters with the Predator, if I recall properly. So I just wanted to. It felt like it made sense to have a woman in the role fighting the Predator, because I think the Predators have always sort of seen them as weaker and not a threat. And so I wanted to make sure that Theta felt like a threat and was, in fact, probably within the films, probably one of the bigger threats I've ever faced. So that was sort of my thinking behind it, is that they've never, I don't want to say the women characters hadn't been taken seriously, but they've never been treated as a legitimate threat. And so I just wanted to flip that a little bit as well, as flipping the whole like hunter versus hunted thing.
It was Alice Braga.
Right. Perfect. And she's in another show. Is it, oh God, she's in a great crime TV series that I'm also blind.
She was also in a movie of a comic that you wrote, New Mutants, and that was not a good movie. But
no, that wasn't.
Have you ever read like the Annihilation stuff or like Avengers Arena from the Marvel stuff?
I did read Avengers Arena way back when it was first coming out.
Yeah.
It's been a while though.
Theta reminds me a lot of Cammy from that story. And it's funny because Kev Walker drew that. And like they actually kind of have similar stories in the sense that Cammy was this character from Alaska, of all places. Shouts to Alaska, in the Drax mini series that Keith Giffen wrote. And I think, God, I don't even remember who did it. Yeah, I don't remember. Anyways, who the artist was, but it was a story that was a prelude to the Annihilation series, and it was this little girl who was just like jaded in the world and ends up befriending Drax and ends up going to space with him, and then eventually Annihilation happens, and because there's an intergalactic war, she gets ditched, and she lives on her own for like basically like 15 years or so, and then ends up back on Earth for Avengers, or not 15 years, like 10 years or so, ends up back on Earth for Avengers Arena. And that's the first time we've seen her basically since like the Annihilation days. And it is really interesting because they have like this similar arc, and Kev is shockingly good at drawing both of them. That brings me into Kev Walker, the artist of the book. First off, let's start with this. Did you know that Kev was going to be drawing the book when you first started writing it?
I don't remember. Like I found out fairly early he was drawing it, but I don't know how early on that I figured out he'd be drawing it, because there was some things, I think before he even started designing, I was already on issue 2 or 3, because there was a bunch of stuff that we changed design wise with Theta, because originally she didn't have a buzz cut, she had longer hair in my descriptions, and there was that played a part in a fight in issue 3, but when he designed her with shorter hair, we went and changed some things. But no, I did not know that he was the artist immediately. But I was a big fan of his work, and so when they brought him on board, I was pretty excited. And his designs are incredible. His thought process, he puts a lot of thought into absolutely everything that he does. He'd send me a ton of questions about like the like spaceship and what sort of like thrusters and what sort of propulsion system and all this sort of stuff, and not to make myself sound like an idiot, like, but when I write like the spaceship, I'm like it's just like a spaceship that can travel to one location and act as a home or like a residence, and then sort of travel back, so it just has to be large enough that it's got 20 some odd bunk rooms and a mess hall and other facilities, but he gets really into like the whole way that the ship operates and stuff on a level that is just sort of beyond me, maybe. But it's great. He did all these like crazy mock-ups for the ships. He did like, a ton of designs on all the characters, all the different Predator armors and such. So yeah.
So you're thinking in utility purposes, like how does this get her from point A to B while she's still a living human? And he's like, I need to know what model of thruster and what type of space travel, or like what are they traveling at light speed? Are they doing this because that's going to affect the design stuff?
Yeah. What sort of fuel do they use, etc. Yeah, that sort of stuff. And you know, as much as possible, I'd like everything to feel, you know, very collaborative. So like with that sort of stuff, I'm happy to leave those sort of designs to him and then sort of incorporate more things. And like he threw out like a lot of ideas, like I think we see them in issue. We've seen them already. There's the drones that follow Theta around while she's on the Sandpiper, and they're all of them have Sandy's voice coming out of them, but there's like 3 floating drones that follow her around, which were something that he put in. That I actually loved a lot. It reminded me, there's this old, I think it's Epic comic series called The Last American, with the guy just wandering like this wasteland, and he has a couple of drones that follow him around. I originally had sort of patterned them more after that, and they were each going to have their own unique voice, but then it just made more sense that it was just Sandy talking out of the 3 of them. But those were something that Kev brought to the table. He wanted to put them in, and he's really good for like taking scenes, like the opening fight scene. I had choreographed it one way, and then he came in and sort of like had this idea for sort of rearranging it a bit in his approach, and it came out really great with like there's a really cool like countdown of panels too.
Yeah,
look at it. That's great.
They get bigger in height on each one. It's like all full screen wide panels that are just getting bigger and bigger as it goes down the page. It's really smart. I will say, I mean, that's one thing I really appreciate about Kev as an artist is like, you never really get the sense that he hasn't thought out what the reasoning as to why something's happening. Like, I imagine the reason why he gave Theta short hair is because from a practicality standpoint, it wouldn't make like that. She would probably perceive that as a defensive weakness.
Yeah.
Which is probably what was going to happen in the 3rd issue is it was going to play a part in like, that being a negative for her or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's right. Like he was right there. And it was a thing that was going to be used against her later on. But we just, you know, I figured like she's fought 20 some odd Predators at this point that she would know that the hair's got to go. And so, we just rewrote that, or I just rewrote that sequence in issue 3 so that the hair doesn't play a part of it anymore. But yeah, he's a lot of thought. Like I've never gotten so many notes alongside like outlines, like not outlines, his thumbnails, and he sends thumbnails. It comes thumbnails on one side of the page and sort of notes on his thought process, almost behind every single panel. You know, going through the entire issue.
I love it. It's great. Well, I did want to ask before we get into a lightning round about this. I did want to ask about like the movies in specific and whether or not you kind of looked at them. Because I know before we started talking, we've been talking about this for like months, putting this together, you know, there have been 5 solo movies, Predator, Predator 2, Predators, The Predator, and Prey. Way to go, Prey, mixing up that title. I like it. And then there have been 2 AVP movies, which, you know, we're going to pretend do not exist. But you like 4 of them to varying degrees, Predator, Predator 2, Predators, and Prey. Did you go back and kind of look at those as a storyteller and think like, what can I use? What elements could like factor into my story? Or is it more just off of like memory and just like details that you knew you wanted to carry forward, or like cadences, like the 10-year gap and stuff like that? Were there any factors you kind of tried to draw from those in specific?
So I did go back through all of the films and rewatch them twice before I started writing. And there are like little bits, and I feel like I want to say it's in like Predator 2 that do they mention in there that there's hunting grounds? Because I feel like that's something that came up in my research, that the hunting.
I think they kind of note it a little bit, or like, right. Or I think maybe it was like Gary Busey's character noted it or something. where like
Right.
when because they're the ones that are studying it. Also, just really quick, because I hadn't seen Predator 2 in so long, I didn't realize Jake Busey was canonically Gary Busey's son in the movie. I had no idea. Anyways, sorry, continue.
He's played his son a few times. There's a film I love from the 70s called Straight Time, and I think he's also in there playing his son.
Oh.
Anyway, but that Gary Busey role in number 2 was originally supposed to be Schwarzenegger, right? Like,
oh, I had no idea.
Apparently they in an earlier draft it was going to be Dutch who's running the Otherworldly Life Forms organization. So yeah, there are definitely things that I pulled from the stories. There's things that I sort of nod to a little bit, and things we haven't seen yet in the comics that have been released. But I just wanted to sort of re-immerse myself in the world before breaking out and writing my own. And in both in terms of like things that I think were smart and that I wanted to sort of carry forward, and things I thought that maybe didn't work and just wanted to sort of. It's hard to like. I hate just ignoring things that have happened, but like maybe not necessarily acknowledging, some of the things that have happened. But I think and in watching, like it's the thing that was interesting to me is like how much better a film Predators is than I had remembered it being when it first came out.
It's awesome. I love it.
It's great. I think there's 2 missteps in the film that kind of stick out every time I watch it.
Was it Lawrence Fishburne and Topher Grace?
Yeah. Those 2. Yeah. And I think that, reading into the production of Predators, Lawrence Fishburne was only available for 2 days. So it made sense. I think it makes sense why they wrapped him out of the film so quickly, like in his scene. But it really didn't. That bit didn't really lend much to the overall film, other than to give them information that they couldn't have otherwise had. Right.
Right.
And then the Topher Grace bit was just kind of. It opens up too many questions as to like how the Predators knew that he was a like mass murderer, like do they have some sort of administrative system where like it keeps files on people? Like how do they know this guy was a serial killing doctor? Everyone else you can almost explain that they're like militia or they're like a prisoner on death row, and I just don't know how you explain Topher Grace's character.
Was he like cleaning someone's teeth at the time that happened? Or wait, was he a doctor or a dentist? I thought it was a dentist.
He's a doctor.
Or was a doctor? Was he like middle of surgery or something when they got him? Because everyone else was out on a battlefield and he's just like, I don't know. Maybe he was off trying to get a kill or something like that. But.
Right. I was just gonna say initially what I thought maybe when I first saw the film, I remember is that that he was like that the Predators were sort of like giving the humans the advantage of having like a field medic almost, which almost makes more sense, right? Like if you give them a field medic, someone who can sort of keep them going for as long, because you're Predator, you want it to be like a fight. You don't want it to just be like you squashing bugs, right? But yeah, obviously it wasn't that.
I like to think that maybe, it's like with professional sports, they have their scouts out there making sure that they know about all the strengths and weaknesses of their opponents and stuff like that.
Sure.
Maybe they got scouts. Maybe they got people with like satellites that are just like looking at a distance, just being like, okay, what's going on? Oh, this doctor guy, he's pretty interesting. Also, I will point out though, that kind of taps into the only frustrations I had with Predator 2, where it seemed like all of the other movies, it was all about like hunting. Well, besides the Predator, where they're like, we're going to get after like McKenna's kid. They're like trying to find all these apex like tough guys and everything like, or tough people. And in Predator 2, there's the whole train scene where they just like basically are indiscriminately killing anyone that has a gun. There's like old ladies with guns. They're like, you're dead. I guess in their mind though, they're at a threat at that point because they're probably firing guns at them. So that might open it up a bit.
I think they take out anyone who's just in the way, right? I think they don't care. They don't, once they're there, it's killing time, right? And
I would get so far out of the way. I would like, as soon as that stuff happens in New York, I'm like, I've seen this before. I'm out. Or excuse me, right. Los Angeles in Predator 2.
Right.
Okay, before lightning round, I did want to bring up one other thing too, though. So you have your own creator-owned book. You have a creator-owned book right now that's going with Gavin Guidry. It's interesting to think about where you have books like this, or you have Batman Incorporated right now. You had like New Mutants before. You've had all these varying projects. Is there a part of you? I mean, obviously you want to work on Predator because you want to work on Predator, and obviously like having a for hire paycheck is a massive plus as well. But is there a part of you that ever looks at these projects as kind of like an investment in like somebody possibly discovering your own work, or your creator own work on the side, or is that not part of your mental arithmetic?
I don't think that's part of it. It's definitely like, can be a sort of bonus, not consequence, but a bonus side effect of doing sort of big two stuff. But like Predator, I love doing. I'm at a point now where like I'm have turned down some work, and I'm only doing stuff that I'm really interested in. I was just before COVID hit. I was like really burnt out.
Yeah.
And I was already talking about cutting back on books with publishers. And then COVID hit and just like wiped everything out. Like I didn't have anything going for a bit. And so I'm at a point where I'm really only taking on projects that I'm interested in and trying to turn down things that I'm not. Whereas when I first started, I would just kind of, anything that came my way, I would sort of take and try and find the angle, what I mean, to make it feel like something I am interested in or could be interested in. But yeah, working on Predator, working on Batman Incorporated, I'm only working on those because I'm interested in working on those books. There's something about those books that appeals to me. Obviously, Predator we've talked about for the last hour or whatever. Batman Incorporated, I just think is a really fun idea. I think Ghostmaker is really Ghostmaker and Clown Hunter are sort of the Batman Robin of the team, and their dynamic is just so much fun to write. And I do like the idea that both of them are they're like trigger happy. They have no problem with killing, but they're sort of hemmed in by this promise they've made to Batman where they can't. And so I like the idea of these guys sort of being caged in a little bit and having to push against that, like, and constantly coming up against this sort of thing. Like, if I just do the thing I've always been doing, this person or this villain or whatever will never be a problem again. But, I made Batman this promise, so now I gotta, and that'll be a big part of the story, so I'm constantly pushing up against it. But yeah, the hope is that, you do creator-owned stuff, which is just 100% from you or from you and your collaborator. And it's harder, to get that stuff in front of people. So you hope that, like, hey, if someone likes Predator, someone likes Batman Incorporated, maybe they'll go check out There's Something Wrong with Patrick Todd, or they'll go back and look at some of my older work or whatever.
Or if you do another Kickstarter, now you can be like from the, writer of Predator or whatever.
I don't know that I'm ever doing another one, but we'll see.
You didn't have a great time?
It was fine. It was great. I thought everyone warned me about how much work it was, but I'd spent, before getting into comics, I'd been self-publishing for like 15 years. So I'm like, I got this. I've done this. I've dealt with printers. I've mailed stuff out before. I know how to do this. Not a big deal. But it was really so much work when it came to fulfilling stuff and putting the project together that I'm not sure. I might do another one, but like I'm very on the fence about it.
You did it at probably the worst possible time to do it, just because like the pandemic. Like there's so many ones where you would just get. I back a lot of Kickstarters, and so I'd get all these messages being like, "I swear this is coming. I swear." It's like it's like stuck on a boat in like I don't know, like was it the Suez Canal was the one where they had all the problems where the boat got turned sideways and stuff, and it's just was your boat
our boat wasn't there, but our boat was caught in that whole clusterfuck in Los Angeles off the coast of California, so our boat was there, so it took what should have taken about 8 weeks, I think, took 4 months.
Oh my God.
For the books to get over. I would say like we got the book out decently on time. We were like a little bit late, but there were some Kickstarters I backed that were supposed to be like 6 months before my book that I'm finally just getting now. So I'm happy with how long. But yeah, there was a lot of, that's one of the problems you run into. It's just things backed up. And yeah, running it during COVID was not maybe the best, but it was sort of my COVID project. Like it was a thing. I had nothing going on. I had a lot more downtime than I was used to, and it was a chance to finally get back to doing some murder book stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we're gonna close the lightning round. Really quick, I do want to say it's really funny. I think I'm committing a comic book crime by having somebody who's writing a Batman comic on and not talking to them about Batman. But whatever, it's Predator time. Lightning round. All right, so I'm just gonna ask you questions. Most of these are pretty quick, so I just want to get your takes because I'm curious on your perspective from a Predator person perspective. First question: best Predator movie.
Predator.
Favorite Predator movie.
It's probably Predator. Yeah.
That's where I have a tough time is like Prey might be the best Predator movie in my mind if I really got down to it, but I just love the first Predator movie. I saw it at a 30th anniversary showing at a local theater that also serves beer, and it was such a blast to watch, and there was just people like yelling lines at the movie theater or at the screen, and it was great, and it's just really enjoyable. But yeah, I mean, it is tough.
I have a lot of memories tied to Predator. Like I said, the drive-in, watching it from my bedroom window, and then like watching the videotape. And Prey is just so new that it is definitely like a close second.
Yeah.
But like it's one of those where like I want to see, ask me again in like 5 years, and maybe Prey's overtaken Predator. I think that they're both really solid though.
So if that's 1, 2, is 3, 4? Which one's third? Predators or Predator 2?
What's funny is you posted a list last night on Twitter.
Yeah,
and my list is identical. So it's Predator, Prey, Predators, Predator 2, and then the Predator.
I gotta say, rewatching Predator 2, the open of that movie is so much crazier than I remembered. The only scene I really remembered vividly was the train scene, but the open where it's just like open warfare in like Los Angeles as like these crazy, like that whole scene, and then like the cartel guy running in and just snorting a ton of coke and then getting killed by like a predator. That right. I was watching that and I was just like, my parents let me watch this movie. This movie is insane. Oh, of course, I probably watched it on USA and it was like really weirdly censored. But anyways. But okay, next question. You might not have an answer for this. I do think that at least in the first movie, one thing it's really famous for is the lines. There's a lot of really good lines. Do you have a favorite line from the movies?
Man, I don't know.
It can be a skip. It can be a skip.
Yeah, I think like there's my favorite, the one that keeps coming back is like the King Willie bit from from Predator 2.
Yeah.
It's like, there's no killing what cannot be killed.
It's so great.
And that whole bit, I unfortunately don't remember it verbatim. It's also quoted a lot on Ice Cube's The Predator. So I think it's just ingrained in my brain.
Mine is there's something out there waiting for us, and it ain't no man. Billy. That actually brings up to the next question, though. Billy, the probably, I would say, the most competent non-Dutch character in the first movie, or at least most theoretically competent. My question for you is it disappointing or amazing that Billy gets totally wrecked off screen in the first movie? Like, he's getting this whole, like, they have this minute-long production where he's, like, getting prepared to fight the Predator on, like, a fallen, I think it's either a bridge or it's, like, a fallen tree with, like, a beautiful river backdrop. And you're like, oh, man, this is going to be epic. And then it cuts over to Dutch and them, and all you hear is a scream. Is it disappointing or amazing that after all that build-up, that's what you get?
I think it's disappointing.
Really?
I don't know.
I'm with you. I'm like 50-50. It's exactly disappointing and amazing in concert with one another.
Right. I think he deserved. It sounds weird to say I think he deserved for us to see his death, but I think with the build-up, it definitely felt like it was going to be more.
Next question: do you have a favorite character from all of them, or is it just Dutch?
So you know what? In the first one. And this is because when I was younger, I was a big wrestling fan. I loved Jesse Ventura Blaine in the first one.
Yeah.
Growing up, I loved that character a lot, even if he was sort of an asshole. But, yeah, I don't know. I think that the first one has a lot of really great characters.
Mm-hmm.
And Dutch seems like a cop-out. But... in terms of most memorable characters, he's probably it. But Blaine, I loved the fucking gun he had. Just
he had the minigun, right?
Yeah, that just like as a 13-year-old watching that movie, you're like, oh shit, yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Such an amazing weapon.
I have to admit, one contender long term, and I'm gonna have to watch it again. I really love Dakota Beavers as Tabby in Prey, like the brother. He was really good, and he never acted before. What a hell of a performance by somebody who had never acted before. Although I guess in that sense, I don't know if Jesse Ventura had ever acted before, but that actually brings up another question. This is more of a trivia question. Does Predator feature more governors than Predators features Oscar winners? Which one has more?
Oh, geez. There's 2 in the first, right?
Yep.
And who's one? So is it the same?
It's 2-2. It's Mahershala Ali and Adrian Brody. And that's one of the things that's really funny to watch about Predators.
I forgot about he.
Yeah, you watch Predators and it's like if you watched it back then, you're like, I don't know a lot of these actors. Now you're like Walton Goggins, Mahershala Ali. Alice Braga's done a lot more stuff since then. It's actually a really loaded cast. And like back then, it was just like, this is the muscular Adrian Brody movie where Lawrence Fishburne is just like very insane. Yeah, that was kind of the gist of it. Okay, next question. How much better is the movie that Sterling K. Brown thinks he's in than the one he actually is in when it comes to the Predator? Because I don't know where you stand on Sterling K. Brown in that movie, but I actually think he's really good in it. And mostly because he is extremely menacing in a very comical way. And I don't know. I mean, I am just kind of generally curious. I know you guys said I wouldn't bring up the Predator, but is there a part of you that secretly loves the Predator?
No.
That was such a resigned no too.
No, I think there's it feels like there was a lot of I feel like the film we saw was not the film that we were initially intended to see. There's a lot that it feels like has changed. And Sterling K. Brown, he was with the military, right? And that
he was the guy that was just kind of in charge. He was like the main human adversary.
So that is a large part of the stuff that I wasn't crazy about in the film. And so the film is not as cool as the film he thought he was in, I think. Yeah, I don't. It just feels that film felt just so messy, and like there was probably a better film somewhere along the line that just got lost. Because I love Shane Black's writing, like Kiss Kiss Bang Bang and The Nice
Guys, yeah,
are both incredible films. And obviously he's in the original Predator, and so I was hoping that all those things would sort of gel together and give us like a really great film, but it just felt really disjointed and which is too bad.
I really do think that you watch that movie and then you watch any other Shane Black movie and you can just tell that there's been changes made from Shane Black's vision. Like it's just hard to imagine Shane Black because there's just too many competing plots in there. And there's just too much going on. But, okay, lastly, I'll close with, I have to bring up the AVP of it all. I'm also a massive Alien franchise fan. You're an Alien fan. Do you think there exists an idea that could make Aliens versus Predator work? Or is it just kind of, we've gone too far down that path and we just don't need to see that again?
I think it's possible to make it work. I think the original comics, it's been a long time since I've read the original AVP comics. I think did a good job. But I think it's difficult because you need humans in the middle, right?
Right, because they're both kind of like, they're not faceless monsters, but they're kind of just killing machines.
Non-communicative monsters. Yeah. You don't have anything to sort of attach yourself. They're not sympathetic. It's hard to root for one or the other. I think it's possible. I just think it's difficult. And obviously I don't think the films did much because they just introduced too much weird other stuff too, right? Like that cube-like pyramid.
That was like in Antarctica or whatever?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, Cube, the movie, the if anyone's seen it's like a 1990 movie. I think there's some meat on that bone. I just don't, it's a really tough one to do because to have two opposing, the aliens versus the predators, you have to have humans. So it's not, and then it's just like humans versus two different creatures. I don't know. It just doesn't It's tough. It's really hard.
I'm right there with you because it's like you fundamentally cannot have it. I mean, if an actual just Aliens versus Predator movie, nothing else, like you have no communication and it's just like endless fighting. And it's kind of meaningless. And as soon as you introduce that other element, it's kind of like a lot of the modern Godzilla movies. Like I like the Godzilla movies, but it ultimately becomes a lot about the humans. And it's like every second that you're spending with the humans in a real sense that it's about the humans as opposed to like the big monster of it all, it kind of takes away from it a little bit. And I don't know. I mean, I think that's one of the tricky things about doing any of these big franchises is like the more you try to center it on people as opposed to like the conflict between the two, the more it becomes murky, and that's tough to do. But I don't know. I'm not a writer.
Yeah, and having the conflict between the two is really hard to do when you cannot, show any sort of communication. You like it would be say if you're doing it as a film, it's hour and a half, 2 hours silent film more or less, which is like grunting and clicking and screeching. And I just don't know how you make it work. And maybe someone smarter than me can figure it out. I think maybe in the comics there's a way to make it work, and I think like the original comics did a pretty good job. But it's been a while since I've read those, so I couldn't even tell you what they were about anymore.
I imagine it's about Aliens versus Predator. But
yes.
Anyways, Ed, that is all I have for you. Thank you so much for joining me to dive deep into the world of Predator. I appreciate you taking the time.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with writer Ed Brisson. You can find him on Twitter at Ed Brisson and his work in There's Something Wrong with Patrick Todd, Predator, and the upcoming Batman Incorporated. Love Off Panel and want to support it? Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts today and give the show a rating or review while you're at it, but 5 stars only. You can also support the show by backing it on Patreon. Find the show on Patreon at patreon.com/offpanel. And when you back it on there, you get early access to each week's podcast as well as weekly content and more. Want even more? Subscribe to my subscription comic site Sketched at sketch.com for long-form articles, interviews, and the rest of the site's content. You can find Off Panel and Sketched on social media by liking it on Facebook at /Sketched. That's SKTCHD. Following on Twitter and Instagram at @SketchComic or following me at @SliceFriedGold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Dennis Hoffman, Jason Hussa, Mike Hansel, Kieran Gillen, Jonathan Kent Uratam, Henry Johnson, Jingo Boren, James Tyne IV, Chris Langford, Jason Wood, Tom Peachy, Ben Damstead, Rom V, Devin Fitzsimons, Nick Walker, Patrick Coyle, Isaac Oren, Scott Carpenter, Rent Narb Studios Comics, Nicholas Palmieri, Capes and Tights Podcast, Klaus Van de Ven, Brian, Submet Industries, Raj Patel, Jack Mulqueen, Kyle, Carl Kerschel, Robert Masella, Elza Chartier, Luke Nakashoji, Elliot Metz, Dr. Luke, Scott Hazelwood, Scott Buwan, Michael Tunk, Canadian by Proxy, Johnny Cannon, Bradley Rader, Carl Choi, Brandon DePills, Patrick Power, Declan Shelby, Dan Gurino, Josh Williamson, Adam Freeman, Ben Wild, Brian Klein Q, SB, Nick Bennett, Daniel Whitfield, Susanna Puller, Reed Hinkley Barnes, Mario Tiambang, AbductedTheComic.com, Andrew Carita, Matt Mahoney, Charlie Chu, Stephen Hall, Pensacola Pop Comics, Kim Estlin, Philip Myra, Christian Shelton, Kenny Porter, Chris Pachalo, Torrin Grumbeck, Fuzz Bubbles, Christopher Todd, Transmitter Down, Waltz Comics and Books, Carl Mazel, Danny Ollie, Paul Salates, Akil Wilson, Alex Dimitriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Wesley Giff, Sean Kirkham, Alistair Ross, Julio Anta, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Reinwan, Vita Ayala, Dave Slusher, WMQ Comics, Akil Kokachi, Sean Pinello, Kent Heidelman, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, David Kelly, Rob Wilson IV, Nick Polito, Brendan Fletcher, Jonathan Nilsson, Jason Massey, Adam Bogart, Matthew Taylor, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Baraldi, Nick Hall, Bjorn Basin, John Hendricks, Steve Anderson, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Chang, Colin McMahon, Chris Palmer, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Kat McKenzie, Adam Highfield, Fiona Staples, Mark Abnett, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim Demonakos, Norbert Nicolo, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote and performed Off Panel's theme song just for the show. Check out their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.